Hey, it's MJ from the Coaches Panel. I hope you're well. Welcome back to another player review. This time, it's Brodie Grundy. We're going to talk about what it means for him from an AFL Fantasy and SuperCoach perspective, what it means for his former team, the Melbourne Football Club, and also what it means now for his new team, the Sydney Swans. Let's talk about Brodie Grundy and what it means at Melbourne. Unfortunately, the experiment didn't work. It was just 12 months ago. It was a coup for the football club, signing Brodie Grundy in the hopes that this two-headed ruck monster between him and Max Gawn would be incredibly prolific, damaging and potent for the Melbourne Football Club's hope to get themselves back another premiership medal and a premiership cup. Sadly, it just didn't work. The hope was that Max could play a little bit more back of the ball when he was rucking. Brodie could play a little bit more forward of the ball. But the reality is that throughout the season, outside of a 3-game stretch where Max didn't play, Brodie and he just never really got in sync with each other. And then towards the end of the year, he fell out of favour, and even to the point in the finals where there was a clear need for a key forward, it just didn't head his way. And so for Melbourne fans, it was the move that never really got moving and the move that got away. That forward line has never really functioned, and Max, to be who he's meant to be, which is one of the most prolific and dominant rucks in the game, meant he needed to play in that ruck role. And when Brodie was taking a heavy chunk of that during the season, when they were role sharing, it never really worked out. So for Melbourne, it's understandable why they've got some interest in a bunch of other players, some ruck forwards. Tom Fullerton has made his way to the club via request as well. So they'll get some nice depth through that spot. They've got Van Rooyen. They've got some others that are building nicely in the VFL that can play this key forward and ruck role, but there's some significant surgery that needs to go on in this forward line, and unless Max goes down injured, I don't think Melbourne are going to see a significant fall away from what it means to not have Brodie. From a Sydney Swans perspective, this is a huge coup for them. Tom Hickey has been a really valuable pickup over the past couple of years, but this year it was really evident he was coming to the end of his footballing lifestyle and has since retired. So the club needed something that would give them presence at centre bounce. Presence as the marking option around the ground. And Brodie's going to bring both those things, but he'll also bring some other weapons. He brings to them an additional midfield presence. Cast your mind back, not so much to just the couple of games he played in Melbourne where he was the full ruck, but Brodie, before his injuries started to hit at Collingwood, he was prolific around the ground, winning contested possessions, linking up through uncontested chains of ball movement from the back half through to the forward line, and bringing some defensive pressure, not just for a guy of his size, but for a player of any caliber at the AFL level. So Brodie Grundy coming into this team could be one of the biggest big moves that changed the fortunes for the Sydney Swans. They didn't do much in the offseason 12 months ago, but they're busy this offseason, and the signing of Brodie Grundy to them really does fill one big need they had, which was additional presence and additional strong ruck. They have got that. At his best, Brodie is one of, if not the best ruckman in the AFL. So what does this mean from a fantasy footy perspective? Really, it means we've got ourselves a potential monster bargain here. Now, you've got to go back to his prime era before he was injured at Collingwood, but that sort of 2018, 2019 territory, he was delivering us 120s in AFL Fantasy and Dream Team and 130s in SuperCoach. Now, I think those days are possibly gone. It's certainly in the worlds of possibility, but I think those days are probably gone. But based on what he's priced at, he's priced 20 points per game below what he did in his final season at Collingwood already. So he's valued, like we're talking mid-70s AFL Fantasy, mid-80s in SuperCoach. He has got clearly, in my eyes, a minimum 20 points per game of value. It could be upwards of 30, maybe even 40 points per game of value if all the variables go his way. This is a significant move for us. Now, some might be thinking, MJ, hang on a second. you're talking about a guy that hasn't been lead ruck for a long time, struggled at Melbourne. In fact, in his last year at Collingwood, it was an unders season, even without that injury that ultimately ended his season and his tenure at the football club. But let's take it, it's a small sample size, but the 3 games he played without Max Gawn, 100 plus average across the formats. I think it was up at like a 135, 138 in SuperCoach and a low ton in AFL Fantasy. So he's got 30 plus points per game of value. Yes, it's a 3-game sample size, but it gives us enough to have some confidence entering into this 2024 season that maybe the best of Brodie isn't completely gone yet. It's a reminder of us once again that Brodie as a ruckman is an absolute force from a fantasy and a SuperCoach perspective. It's going to be fascinating where people value him next year in the ruck line. We've already talked about this with a number of players already moving that are rucks, with the likes of a Matthew Flynn and a Todd Goldstein. It's fascinating to me how people structure up their rucks. Do they go for the big premiums like Marshall and English, who didn't do anything wrong for us last year? Do they go and pick a Max Gawn, who now is back to rucking on his own? And we saw last year in the back third of the year, he's just as good as he's ever been from a fantasy perspective. Are we looking for value in a Cherry? Are we looking for a Goldstein or in a Brodie Grundy? Have we got potentially the best of both worlds? What excites me about the ruck division in 2024 is we'll see great diversity, in my opinion, of how this line will line up, because there's probably 8 to 10 different combinations that people could legitimately go to at R1 and R2, and heading into round 1 could feel really comfortable with. So for me, Brodie Grundy is a serious consideration in your starting squad. He presents incredible value, and I can foresee a lot of coaches rolling with him at R2 and even a bunch at R1 should they take some other value that is around for us of other rucks that have either moved clubs or had other things move around them that creates great opportunities. So I see Brodie as a really popular pick in 2024, and I think that is a really warranted selection as well. There is one more nugget I've got to give you on Brodie, and then we'll wrap it up, and that is that he is a chance. It's not a big chance, but I think it's a chance that Brodie Grundy will also have dual position status for us. He was certainly playing a heavy ruck role throughout his time at the Melbourne Football Club, but I think there's a chance he picks up ruck forward DPP, and if he does, then his relevance, his value, and his ownership stocks will only increase, because that DPP will be incredibly valuable, let alone the options it gives us of what we can do at R1, R2, F3, F4, F5. It opens up so much strategy and so many other selections. So if I had to be cornered on it, I'd probably say it's unlikely, but it's a chance. And I think there's enough data that without seeing it from champion data, I think there's enough that it's a conversation that we could have. So keep an eye on that. But even if Brodie doesn't get forward status, he's an absolute lock of a conversation to look at. You must be watch listing him. You don't have to start him. It's October, for goodness sake. No one is a have to at this time in the year, but you have to seriously consider Brodie Grundy in your starting squad as a Sydney Swan in 2024. If you're enjoying these off-season player moves that we're talking about, either free agent or trade reviews, if you're loving them, make sure you followed us on here at YouTube, and every single player that we are talking about, if you've followed us and you've got your notification on, we'll tell you about it straight away. So that's good news for you. At coachespanel.tv, plenty of articles roll year round through there. Make sure you check it out. You can follow us throughout all the social handles of Instagram, of X and Facebook, and of course our Patreons. For just a few dollars a month, you can get additional bonus content from us year round. All the details, if you want any of those, are in the description of this video. I'll be back with you again soon with another player review of someone that's moved clubs this off-season in 2024.